The red and blue lights washed the sidewalk in bruised color, flashing across Malik Johnson's hands as he lifted his camera higher. His palms were steady, but his chest wasn't. The lens caught everything. The cruiser angled too close to the curb, the officer's jaw clenched tight, the way passers-by slowed without stopping. "Keep filming," Malik whispered to himself. The officer turned. White, late 30s, badge glinting like a warning. He crossed the street in 3 long strides, boots slapping pavement. "You think this is funny?" the officer said. Malik shook his head. He didn't lower the camera. He knew his rights. He'd memorized them the way other kids memorize lyrics. "I'm just recording," Malik said. His voice sounded younger than he felt. The first hit came fast, an elbow into Malik's chest that knocked the air out of him. The camera slipped, clattered, kept rolling. Malik tasted copper. The officer shoved him against the squad car, forearm pressing his throat. A woman screamed. Someone else raised the phone. No one stepped in. "I told you to stop," the officer said, breath hot with coffee and anger. "You people never listen." That sentence landed harder than the blows. Malik's fingers twitched, desperate for the camera. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Document everything, son, even when it hurts." The officer yanked the camera up, eyes narrowing as he glanced at the cracked screen. Then he froze. On the shattered display, beneath the red recording, a press badge flickered into focus. CNN. The officer's grip tightened instead of loosening, and the camera kept recording as the sirens wailed closer. Malik Johnson noticed the lights before he heard the siren. They flickered across the storefront windows, red then blue, bending around glass and brick like something alive. Malik slowed his steps and adjusted the strap of his camera bag against his shoulder. Instinct settled in before fear. He lifted the camera, thumb brushing the familiar ridge near the record button. A police cruiser had stopped halfway onto the sidewalk, blocking a man on a bicycle. The cyclist's hands were raised, palms out, his voice shaking even from across the street. Malik framed the shot automatically, knees slightly bent, breath shallow. He'd done this before, captured moments that other people pretended not to see. "Just keep it steady," Malik murmured. The officer stepped out of the cruiser. White, broad shoulders, jaw tight like it had been locked that way for years. Malik zoomed in, catching the badge number, the cruiser ID, the way the officer's hand rested too comfortably near his belt. Someone brushed past Malik. A woman muttered, "Don't get involved." The officer looked up. Their eyes met. For a split second, Malik thought the officer would ignore him. Then the man's expression shifted. Not surprise, not confusion, but irritation. Ownership challenged. "You," the officer barked. "Put that away." Malik didn't move. His heart slammed against his ribs, loud enough that he was sure the microphone picked it up. "I'm allowed to film," Malik said. He hated how young his voice sounded. The officer crossed the street fast. Too fast. The cyclist was forgotten, frozen in Malik's peripheral vision. "I said put away," the officer repeated, stopping inches from Malik's face. The smell hit him first. Coffee, sweat, something sour. Malik tilted the camera just enough to keep the officer centered. "I'm press," Malik said. "I'm not interfering." The officer's mouth twitched. Then pain exploded in Malik's chest. An elbow drove into him, knocking the breath out in a sharp, humiliating sound. Malik stumbled back, the camera slipping from his grip. It hit the pavement hard, but didn't stop recording. The world tilted, sound stretching and snapping back all at once. "What are you doing?" someone shouted. The officer grabbed Malik by the hoodie and slammed him against the cruiser. Metal bit into his cheek. Malik tasted blood. "Stop resisting," the officer said, though Malik wasn't moving. "I'm not," Malik coughed. The officer's forearm pressed against Malik's throat. The pressure wasn't crushing, just enough. Controlled. Practice. A phone chimed nearby. Another camera. Still no one stepped between them. "You kids think a camera makes you untouchable," the officer said quietly. "It doesn't." Malik's fingers twitched toward the ground where his camera lay, lens cracked, red light still glowing. His dad's voice filled his head, calm and steady from another lifetime. If they don't want to be seen, there's a reason. The officer bent, snatched up the camera, and glanced at the screen. His eyes narrowed. For half a second, the pressure eased. Malik sucked in air, lungs burning. Then the officer's grip tightened again. "Cute," he said. "You think this changes anything?" Sirens wailed closer now. "Back up." The officer yanked Malik's arms behind his back, snapping cold cuffs around his wrists. Metal clicked shut. Final. Malik's knees shook as he was shoved into the back of the cruiser. Head ducked roughly. The door slammed. Through the glass, Malik saw the officer speaking to another cop, laughing once, sharp and short. Malik stared down at his hands, already swelling, and tried to slow his breathing. The red recording light reflected faintly in the window. It was still on. The precinct smelled like antiseptic and tension. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering slightly, making the linoleum floor gleam with a cold, sterile shine. Malik's wrist stung under the cuffs, bruises already forming, and his hoodie smelled faintly of sweat and street dust. He was shoved into a metal chair with a scraping clang, the kind that made him wince. His camera, now mangled, lens cracked, red light still blinking, had been confiscated as evidence, along with his phone and press badge. "Name," a voice barked. Malik looked up. Desk sergeant, mid-40s, fat around the middle, mouth tight. His eyes slid over Malik's face with a detached curiosity, as if the kid were an object, not a human being. "Malik Johnson," he said, 17 years old. "Address?" Malik hesitated, then recited it carefully. Each word felt like it carried more weight than it should. The sergeant scribbled something down without looking up. "You know why you're here?" Malik's stomach dropped. He knew exactly why, but the idea that the system would even suggest he might be in the wrong made Bao rise. "I was recording a police stop. That's all," Malik said. "Really?" The sergeant's tone was flat, condescending. "And whose idea was it to film the police, huh?" Malik's throat tightened. He wanted to shout that it was his job, that he was a journalist, that he had every right, but every word felt like it might land like a punch, and he was already bruised. "You people always think rules don't apply to you," the officer, Daniel Reese, said suddenly, stepping into the room like a shadow. His badge caught the fluorescent light, gleaming. "Next time, we won't be so polite." Malik flinched. The words weren't just directed at him. They carried history, the weight of hundreds of unspoken injustices, the kind he'd read about in news articles and whispered about in school hallways. Denise Johnson's voice broke through the tension as she barged into the precinct, card in hand. "Excuse me. My son, what have you done to him?" A pair of younger officers shifted uncomfortably. Reese didn't look up. "Mom, stay calm. He's being processed," one said with forced politeness. Processed. The word sounded clinical, like Malik was a defective machine, not a kid. Processed. Denise repeated sharply. "He was just recording. He's a minor. And he's a paid contributor for CNN. Do you understand what you're doing?" Reese finally lifted his gaze, eyes cold. "We're just following protocol. You know how it works, ma'am. Cameras don't exempt anyone from the law." Denise's hands clenched at her sides. "Protocol doesn't mean you can assault him." Reese smiled, short, tight, cruel. "And yet, here we are." Malik's heart thumped violently. His stomach churned. Every fiber was being screamed at him to move, to speak, to fight, but he was trapped, cuffed, with an officer whose authority was backed by walls, badges, and an entire system trained to protect him. "Where's internal affairs?" Denise demanded. "Someone needs to see this." One of the young officers whispered just above a breath. "We can call them eventually." "Eventually?" Denise's voice cracked. "My son is being hurt right now, and you call eventually?" Reese leaned against the counter, arms crossed, like he owned the room. "I suggest you wait quietly, ma'am. Otherwise, things might get messy." Malik wanted to scream. He wanted to shout that the camera had recorded everything, that the world would see. He wanted to tell Reese that nothing could hide the truth, not his smirk, not his words, not the system that tried to protect him. But his throat felt raw, bruised, the sting of Reese's elbow and forearm still burning through him. A clerk brought in a clipboard. Sign here for your personal effects being temporarily confiscated. Malik's eyes darted to the camera, lying like a wounded animal in a plastic evidence bag. He felt like the room was spinning, fluorescent lights spinning over him. Officers' faces blurred into a single oppressive force. "Do I have a lawyer?" Malik asked. "You have a right to one," Reese said flatly. "But I wouldn't expect anyone to show up for a little kid causing trouble." The words cut, deep, like knives. Malik's jaw tightened. "I'm not causing trouble," he said, though the sound was brittle. Reese shrugged, the kind of shrug that made it clear he didn't care. "Trouble finds itself, sometimes, especially with kids like you." Denise's hand shook. "Kids like him? What does that even mean?" Reese's grin was slow, deliberate. "It means know your place. Don't get in the way of people who keep the city running." Malik's chest heaved. He wanted to reach for his camera. He wanted to rewind time, take 3 steps back, record something different, anything that might protect him. The desk sergeant cleared his throat. "We'll need a statement. But first, fingerprinting." Malik's hands were guided to a scanner. Cold glass pressed against his skin, scanning lines like tiny electric snakes. He felt exposed, labeled. Every mark, every print, felt like evidence that he existed in a system that treated him like he didn't belong. "Your phone, Mr. Johnson," the clerk said. Malik's fingers ached at the absence of the device. The world outside his camera's lens felt muted, slowed. Social media notifications would come later. Bystanders' footage would surface later. But for now, he was trapped in this fluorescent tomb, powerless, waiting. Reese lingered nearby, observing Malik's every twitch, every inhale, every bite of words that never left his mouth. He made small comments under his breath to the younger officers, ensuring Malik heard just enough to know he was being mocked. "You ever think about who controls the narrative?" Reese said quietly, leaning close so only Malik could hear. Malik swallowed hard, fury and fear twisting inside him. He had the footage. He had the proof. But at that moment, proof felt like a fragile thing, dangling on the edge of Reese's amusement. Denise stepped forward, protective, towering in her resolve. "You don't get to speak to him like that," she said. Reese's head tilted. "I get to do exactly this," he said, voice low, venomous. "And you get to watch it happen." Malik's vision blurred. He focused on the blinking red light of his camera inside the evidence bag. It was still recording. It was still witnessing. Somewhere in the chaos, the power of what he'd captured, a young journalist against a grown officer, lingered, fragile but alive. For the first time since this all started, Malik felt the faintest stir of hope. If the camera lived, so did the truth. The room's fluorescent hum grew louder, oppressive, but Malik did not look away. Not from the evidence of injustice. Not from the officer who thought he had control. And somewhere deep inside, he vowed, whatever the cost, whatever the scars, it would not end like this. The camera was watching. And so was Malik. The first time Malik saw his footage again, it was on a laptop in the public defender's small office, the hum of the air conditioner filling the room like background tension. His fingers hovered over the trackpad as though touching the screen might shatter it. Every frame of that brutal moment, the shove, the strike, the forearm against his throat, was frozen in stark, unforgiving clarity. The red glowed in the corner of the screen, a tiny, defiant heartbeat that refused to blink out. "This is good evidence," the attorney said quietly. He was a young man, overworked, with tired eyes and a neatly pressed suit that felt almost comical in the worn office. "It's raw, undeniable." Malik exhaled slowly. It shows everything. The punches, the words. His throat was tight. "It shows him hitting me, but it also shows—" He swallowed, shaking slightly. "It also shows a badge." The attorney nodded. "Yes, that's what makes it concrete. That's what makes it impossible to spin entirely." Even as they spoke, Malik felt a ripple of anxiety. The footage existed in 2 realities. One was a cold, fluorescent precinct. The other a world outside where it might actually matter. The next morning, the world outside began to notice. A bystander had uploaded a clip. 10 seconds, shaky but piercing. Malik saw it circulating online, the notification count climbing faster than he could process. Comments scroll like a torrent, some sympathetic, some cruel, some telling him he shouldn't have provoked the officer. Malik's phone, returned temporarily under supervision, vibrated relentlessly. Each buzz felt like a pulse through his chest. He stared at the screen, trying not to think about the bruises blossoming on his ribs. Then his email pinged. From CNN Youth Contributors Program. Subject, urgent Malik Johnson footage. Malik's hands trembled. He opened the email. Within minutes, a producer called. Malik, this is Jenna Harris. Your footage. Yes, we saw it. You're one of our contributors, right? Yes, Malik said, voice tight. I just recorded something. He paused. He didn't know how to explain fear, shock, and pride all at once. You did the right thing. And you need to know this is being taken very seriously here. The producer's voice was calm, professional, but Malik felt a jolt of something he hadn't allowed himself. Validation. Recognition. Your name, your press badge. People are starting to notice, she added. You need to be careful. This could go national. Malik's stomach flipped. National? He had never imagined his footage being seen outside the city, outside his neighborhood, outside the street corner where it had happened. By that afternoon, CNN had posted a moderated clip on their youth journalism segment. 10 seconds, raw, powerful. Malik watched the metrics climb. Thousands of views in minutes. Thousands. People were commenting, sharing, debating. News outlets began picking up the story, overlaying their own headlines, and even local channels ran small segments framing the incident. Malik wanted to feel proud. He wanted to allow himself even a tiny breath of relief. But the more he read the comments, the more he realized that truth didn't protect him from scrutiny, from ridicule, from the echo of every systemic prejudice that had ever touched him. People will try to twist it. Jenna said during a second call, they'll frame you as the aggressor, make it about your age, your neighborhood. They'll downplay the assault. But the footage doesn't lie. Malik stared at the screen. Reese's face flashed in his mind, smug, controlled, believing he could rewrite the story simply because he wore a badge. Malik's jaw clenched. And then came the emails from newsrooms he had never imagined contacting him. Invitations, interview requests, even offers to write his own account of what happened. A teenager from Atlanta, suddenly thrust into a spotlight he hadn't asked for. Yet alongside the validation came fear. His mother, Denise, paced the living room while he watched, wringing her hands. Malik, she said, voice low, fierce, trembling. You have to be careful. The attention, it's dangerous. I know, Mom, Malik said. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to trust that his camera, his footage, could shield him from the worst. But deep down, he knew the system that had hurt him didn't vanish just because the world was watching. School was even harder. Rumors had already begun. Some classmates praised him. Some whispered. Some avoided his eyes. Malik walked the halls with his head high, shoulders tight, camera bag slung over one side. Each glance felt like a judgment. Every whisper felt amplified. Yet, amidst it all, a strange determination grew. He had documented a moment of brutality. And in doing so, he had given a witness it couldn't deny. The red recording light, the stubborn blinking on the cracked camera lens, remained a silent promise. Truth had weight, and Malik could carry it. Then came the first public confrontation. A local news crew found him outside the precinct. Cameras rolled, lights flared, and Malik, still 17, was asked to recount the incident in front of microphones and lenses. Malik, can you tell us what happened? One reporter asked, voice soft but insistent. Malik swallowed, braced, and spoke. I was recording a police stop, and I was attacked for it. I was doing my job. I was a minor. I was the journalist. The words left his mouth like stone, each one dropping into a world that had often ignored voices like his. The camera lights captured him in fragments. Bruised lip, bloodied hoodie, hands shaking just enough to betray the calm he tried to project. By evening, hashtags were trending. Hashtag Malik Johnson. Hashtag police assault. Hashtag press freedom. A petition circulated. Public debate ignited. People spoke, tweeted, wrote letters to city officials. Malik's footage, once trapped in the precinct, now moved faster than the system that had tried to contain him. But as the excitement swelled, a shadow lingered. Reese's name hadn't yet surfaced in media coverage. The officer was still shielded by the department. Paid leave had been mentioned, but nothing concrete. Malik's heart sank at the reminder that viral footage could shine a spotlight, but it could not dismantle the walls, the bureaucracy, or the privilege protecting the abuser. That night, Malik sat on his bed, headphones on, replaying the clip. The red light blinked from the corner of the screen, steady. Every strike, every shove, every oppressive word caught in the lens. He pressed pause. His eyes lingered on the moment the officer had frozen over the camera. Over him, Malik exhaled. He didn't feel victorious. Not yet, but he felt seen. And sometimes in a world that often pretended not to notice, that was the first step toward justice. The city had begun to notice. News outlets, blogs, social media feeds, all post with the same story. A teenage journalist assaulted by a police officer for filming in public. Malik sat in the living room with his mother, Denise, the muted glow of the television reflecting off his bruised face. Anchors spoke in rehearsed tones, the words careful, neutral, yet never quite neutral enough to erase the raw injustice. Officer Daniel Reese has been placed on administrative leave while the department reviews the incident. One news ticker reported, scrolling endlessly. Malik's chest tightened. Administrative leave, a polite way of saying nothing. Denise leaned forward, gripping the edge of the coffee table. This isn't enough. They're treating him like he's being punished with a vacation. Malik didn't answer immediately. He had grown accustomed to the feeling of powerlessness, but now there was something different. Public attention. Millions of eyes were on a system that had tried to erase him. He had thought that seeing the footage might make a difference, but television and social media couldn't undo the bruise across his ribcage, the sting behind his eyes, the fear that clung to his skin. Outside, the city felt the change too. People whispered in cafes, debated in classrooms, scrolled past the footage at lunch tables. The story had grown wings, but wings didn't always mean safety. Malik received messages that made his stomach turn. Threats, insults, comments questioning his credibility. And worst of all, messages from people he knew, classmates and strangers alike, telling him he had brought it upon himself. Denise's hand found his shoulder. We're going to get through this. Don't let them scare you, Malik. You know what you saw. You know the truth. He nodded, but the fear didn't disappear. The footage was viral, yes, but viral meant nothing if it could be spun or ignored. Already, he had seen the first attempts. News commentators suggesting the teen had provoked the officer, blog posts dissecting his movements frame by frame, turning him from witness into accused. That evening, Malik's phone rang. It was CNN. Malik, we're escalating your story, Jenna Harris said, voice calm but urgent. You'll be featured in a segment tomorrow. We're contacting local authorities, making sure your name and your story are prominent. But be careful. The officer hasn't spoken publicly, and his supporters are vocal. Malik's throat went dry. I just want people to know what happened. And they will, she assured him. But attention has a cost. He understood. He had already felt it. The stares, the whispers, the invasive curiosity. Attention was a spotlight, yes, but also a magnifying glass. Every imperfection, every sign of fear, every bruise would be analyzed, dissected, and debated. The next day, Malik walked into school with his camera bag slung across his shoulder, the red of the camera's recording light reflecting on his chest like a warning. Classrooms were quieter, hallways busier. Whispers trailed behind him. Some were sympathetic, others calculating. He could feel the shift in the air, the same way he felt when Officer Reese first approached him on the street. Eyes measuring, weighing, deciding. A small group of students crowded near the cafeteria, phones in hand. Playing the clip again and again, Malik avoided looking. Each replay was a reminder that the world now knew the violence he had endured. During lunch, a teacher approached him. Mr. Carlson, history, mid-50s, usually mild-mannered. Malik, are you okay? He asked quietly. I'm fine, Malik said, voice steady, though inside his chest felt like it was still pounding from that day. Carlson nodded. The school is aware. Administrators are talking to law enforcement. But this will be bigger than the school. People will have opinions. Some of them will be harsh. Malik wanted to protest, wanted to tell him that he had survived more than opinions. But he only nodded. At home, Denise fielded calls from lawyers, journalists, and concerned citizens. Malik sat at the kitchen table, hunched over a laptop, rewatching the footage, studying the red blinking dot. Even in slow motion, the strike, the shove, the words, "You people never listen," hit him anew. "Mom," he said, voice low, "why does it feel like justice is happening yet?" Denise paused. She pulled him into a hug, careful not to press his ribs. "Justice isn't a moment, Malik. It's a process. And sometimes it's slow, but you're not invisible anymore. People are seeing, and that matters." Her words helped, but they didn't erase the hollow feeling. The next day, city officials released a statement. "We are reviewing the incident. Officer Reese is on leave. The department does not condone unnecessary use of force." Malik read it aloud, tone flat. "Does not condone doesn't mean he's punished. It just doesn't condone." Denise's jaw tightened. "It's a start, but we need more. You need support, Malik. Legal support, media guidance. People make sure the story doesn't get buried under bureaucracy." Malik's phone buzzed again. New messages, news alerts, social media notifications. He barely kept up. One clip showed Reese walking through a precinct hallway, badge gleaming, surrounded by officers who offered faint smiles of solidarity. Paid leave, yes, but the optics suggested power unchanged, untouched. A meeting with a media lawyer followed. Malik listened carefully as the lawyer explained options, precautions, and potential pitfalls. "You're a minor," she said, "so your mother will have to be involved in every step. The key is protecting you from retaliation while making the story visible. Social media is both your ally and enemy." Malik nodded. He already felt that tension. He had wanted only to record truth, yet now truth had made him vulnerable. That night, he returned to the original street corner where it happened. The flashing red and blue lights were gone, replaced by the dull hum of the city at night. He raised his camera once more, capturing the empty sidewalk, the faint smell of asphalt and dust, the distant sirens. "You see it, don't you?" he whispered to himself. "You see it all." The camera didn't respond, but he felt a quiet companionship in its lens, in the blinking red that survived assault, media, and viral scrutiny. It was evidence. It was witness. It was proof. Malik realized something crucial. The world might not protect him, might not care, might try to spin the story. But his footage was a weapon in its own way. A silent, stubborn declaration that he existed, that the assault had happened, and that the officer's authority was not absolute. Outside, a siren cut through the night. Malik lowered the camera, letting the street swallow the sound. He knew Reese was still out there, shielded by unions, bureaucracy, and privilege. He also knew that he had allies now, the public, journalists, and those who demanded accountability. He didn't feel safe. He didn't feel whole, but he felt seen. And sometimes Malik understood being seen was the first act of resistance. Malik hadn't expected the phone calls to keep coming. By midweek, reporters, activists, and strangers all wanted his account. Yet even as the attention grew, a heavier, quieter truth settled over him. This wasn't an isolated incident. He learned at first through whispered messages from classmates who had been bullied, shoved, or humiliated by officers in the same precinct. "You're not the first," one girl texted, "and you won't be the last." Each message was a shard, cutting deeper than the bruise across his ribs. Malik felt it tight, not in his stomach. He had believed in justice as something linear. Someone sees wrongdoing, someone calls it out, someone is punished. But patterns weren't linear. They were cyclical, hidden beneath uniforms and procedure manuals, buried under the polite phrases of internal investigations and departmental statements. The next morning, Denise brought stacks of printouts, online news articles, social media threads, even scanned complaints from other families whose encounters with Reese had ended in fear, not viral footage. Some were from parents, some from minors, some anonymous. The language was hauntingly familiar. Excessive force, intimidation, verbal abuse, non-compliance, coded in language that softened brutality into bureaucratic phrasing. Malik sifted through them carefully. Each story mirrored his own experience. Each account repeated the same patterns. Officers shielded by internal protocol. Families dismissed. Witnesses ignored. He realized the assault he had endured wasn't exceptional. It was systemic. Later that afternoon, CNN arranged a small, informal roundtable interview with Malik and two investigative journalists. The setting was tense. A quiet studio, padded walls, microphones ready, cameras rolling but not broadcasting yet. "Malik," one journalist said, leaning forward, "can you tell us why this footage is important beyond your own experience?" He swallowed. "Because this is what happens when cameras aren't there," he said. "Because people see only what they're allowed to see. And too often, that means abuse goes unnoticed. People think it's rare, but it's not." The journalist nodded, taking notes. One of them pulled up additional files. Complaints filed over the last 5 years against Officer Reese. Many had been dismissed for insufficient evidence. Some had never been formally investigated. The pattern was undeniable. Malik's hand shook slightly as he read the summaries. Names, dates, vague descriptions. Complaints about excessive force, intimidation, verbal abuse, targeting minors, harassment during routine traffic stops. Each entry felt like a ghost of his own assault. Outside the studio, the city was buzzing. Social media commentary had evolved. Initial outrage had shifted into organized scrutiny. Citizens were posting, sharing, demanding transparency, comparing Malik's footage with archived reports of Reese's behavior. Even local politicians began to make careful statements, condemning excessive force in principle without directly naming anyone. Back at home, Malik's mom, Denise, tried to hold him steady. "This is bigger than one camera, Malik," she said. "You're showing that patterns exist. You're not alone." "I know," Malik whispered, eyes fixed on screen of his laptop, where more complaints scrolled endlessly. "But it feels like it's bigger than I can fight." Denise placed a hand on his shoulder, firm. "You're not fighting alone. And sometimes the first step is just making the pattern visible. That's what you've done. That's what your footage did." Even with her words, Malik felt the weight of what lay ahead. He was only 17. He had survived an attack. He had survived bureaucratic indifference. But now he faced a broader truth. Systemic abuse didn't rely on individual malice alone. It relied on silence, complicity, and institutions protecting themselves above the people they swore to serve. The next day, Malik was invited to speak at a small community forum hosted by local activists and journalists. The room was crowded. Teachers, parents, reporters, students. Every eye seemed to look at him with expectation, as though the weight of accountability rested on his young shoulders. He took a deep breath, remembering the first time Reese had shoved him against the cruiser. The fear hadn't left entirely, but now it was tempered by a strange resolve. He spoke about what he had seen, the camera rolling, the red light blinking as if alive. "I'm not the only one this happens to," Malik said. "And it's not just Officer Reese. It's a pattern. Other kids, other citizens, have experienced the same thing, and too often no one listens. The camera doesn't make it right, but it can make it visible." Questions came fast, sharp, honest. Parents asked what could protect their children. Teachers asked how to intervene. Journalists asked how to cover stories like his responsibly. Malik answered cautiously, carefully. Each word measured, weighted by the fear of exposure and the hope of change. When the forum ended, a man approached him quietly. Late 40s, wearing a press suit and an ID badge around his neck. "Malik Johnson?" he asked. "I'm an investigative reporter. I've been tracking Reese for years. You're showing exactly what I found." Malik felt his chest tighten. Recognition. Connection. For the first time, he realized his footage wasn't just a single incident. It was a thread that could unravel decades of silence. "Would you like to work with me?" the reporter asked. "We can make sure these patterns get the attention they deserve." Malik nodded, a flicker of determination igniting. Fear still lingered in his ribs, in his bruised hands, in the memory of Reese's forearm pressing against his throat. But now there was purpose. Now there was a path to meaning beyond survival. That night, Malik sat at his bedroom desk, reviewing the footage again, red light blinking steadily. He replayed the scene frame by frame, studying every expression, every motion, every word spoken by Reese. He noted the way the officer's gaze held power, how his authority intimidated not just him, but the surrounding witnesses. He understood then that power wasn't just physical. It was procedural, psychological, institutional. And it was the same power that allowed the patterns he had uncovered to continue unchecked for years. But power also had a vulnerability, visibility. Malik leaned back, letting his eyes close for a moment. He could feel the tension in his body, the residual fear, but also the quiet surge of responsibility. He had a story to tell, not just for himself, but for every other voice silenced by the same patterns. Outside, the city hummed with life, indifferent in its rhythm. Inside Malik's room, the blinking red reflected off the walls, a small, stubborn heartbeat of truth. And for the first time, Malik allowed himself to hope, not for justice to arrive immediately, but for the patterns to be seen, named, and challenged. Because visibility was a first step, resistance came next. The day of the Civil Review Board hearing arrived with the kind of cold, gray morning that made every city street feel heavier than usual. Malik sat in the waiting room with his mother, Denise, hands cuffed only by the invisible weight of anxiety. He watched other families shuffle in, reporters scribbling notes, camera crews quietly adjusting their lenses. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady, merciless, like a reminder that this was bureaucracy at its most formal. Inside the hearing room, a panel of 5 members sat behind a long, polished table. They were a mix of officials and community representatives, their faces professional but distant, as though trained not to react to emotion. At the front of the room, Officer Daniel Reese leaned back in his chair, arms folded, badge gleaming, exuding the same calm arrogance that had haunted Malik since the assault. "Mr. Johnson," the lead board member said, voice clipped and precise, "please state your account of the incident on May 8th. Malik took a deep breath. Every muscle in his body trembled, but he squared his shoulders. "I was recording a routine police stop," he began, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "Officer Reese approached me, demanded I put the camera away, and then struck me. He shoved me against the cruiser and pressed his forearm against my throat." A low murmur ran through the observers, but Malik ignored it. He had rehearsed this moment in his head for days, knew every word had to be precise. "I have the footage," Malik continued, lifting his laptop to display the still images of the cracked lens and the red recording light. "It shows everything. I was not aggressive. I was following the law. I am a minor, and I am a paid youth journalist for CNN. I have every right to record public officials in the line of duty." Reese's expression didn't change. He shifted slightly, but his calm facade remained intact, as if the presence of cameras and panelists somehow made him untouchable. The board member cleared her throat. "Officer Reese, do you wish to respond?" Reese leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "I did what was necessary to maintain order," he said smoothly. "The individual was aggressive, filming in a way that could have interfered with law enforcement activity. At no point did I exceed the bound of my authority." Malik's chest tightened. He could feel every lie in the room as sharply as the forearm that had pressed against his throat. He had expected denials, expected spin, but hearing out loud as if rehearsed was suffocating. The first question from the panel came from a community representative. "Officer Reese, multiple complaints have been filed against you over the last 5 years. How do you respond to that pattern of behavior?" Reese's jaw tightened. Each complaint was addressed according to department protocol. No findings were made that indicated misconduct. Malik's stomach sank. Protocol, again, the word that made abuse invisible. He understood now that the system wasn't broken by accident. It had been engineered to protect power, not citizens. The next witness was a bystander, a middle-aged woman who had filmed part of the incident from across the street. Her hands shook as she handed over her phone. "I saw him shove the boy," she said quietly, and then he grabbed the camera. I don't know why anyone would think it was anything else." Malik felt a flicker of relief. The camera had witnesses. The red that had blinked relentlessly during his assault now blinked again in multiple devices, multiple accounts. He wasn't alone. Throughout the hearing, Malik described the incident in detail. The sequence of blows, the officer's words, the way bystanders hesitated. He described the fear that gripped him, the public humiliation and the physical pain. He spoke slowly, deliberately, making sure every word landed with precision. At one point, Reese's attorney asked, "Are you suggesting this officer acted because of your race?" Malik paused, feeling the weight of every stereotype he had ever encountered. "Yes," he said finally, voice calm but firm. "Because I am black, and because I was asserting a right that is often denied to people who look like me." The room fell silent. The words hung in the air like smoke. Reese's calm veneer faltered for just a moment, a tiny twitch of irritation in his jaw. Malik didn't flinch. He had rehearsed that moment too. Next, the panel called in an internal affairs officer to testify. The officer was young, nervous, shuffling papers in front of him. There were reports filed, he admitted. Some were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Others never pursued fully. The department does have policies in place, but implementation has been inconsistent. Malik's jaw tightened. Implementation. Another word for silence, another shield for abuse. He clenched his fists in his lap, nails biting into his palms, but he didn't move. Finally, the board asked Reese to answer a question he hadn't expected. "Do you acknowledge the psychological and physical impact of your actions on Mr. Johnson?" Reese's eyes flicked briefly to Malik, then back to the panel. "I regret that the situation escalated," he said, voice tight. "But I maintain that I acted within my authority." Malik felt anger flare, sharp and hot, but he also felt a strange sense of calm. The cracks were forming. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, but they existed. The public, the witnesses, the press coverage, all were shifting the balance in ways Reese could no longer fully control. When the hearing ended, Malik stepped outside. The gray morning had given way to a pale sun cutting through clouds. He lifted his camera once more, recording the empty street, the distant hum of traffic, the ordinary rhythms of a city that almost looked away. "See it," he whispered to the blinking red. "See it all." Denise squeezed his shoulder. "You did well," she said softly. "You told the truth. And sometimes that's more powerful than anyone realizes." Malik nodded, letting the wind brush against his bruised face. He knew this was only the beginning. Reese had been forced into visibility, but the system that allowed him to act with impunity still loomed. Still, the officer's calm had begun to crack. That mattered. The footage, the witnesses, the testimony. They had created pressure, a kind of weight that authority could not ignore forever. Malik understood then that power relied on silence, and silence was no longer possible. As they walked to the car, Malik's phone buzzed relentlessly. Social media feeds were alive with reactions to the hearing. Clips of his testimony were circulating, analyzed, debated, and shared. Support poured in from all corners of the country. He felt the tug of exhaustion, but also of purpose. "Mom," Malik said quietly as they drove away, this is bigger than me now." Denise glanced at him, eyes sharp and proud. "And that's why your voice matters," she said. "You're not just surviving anymore, you're forcing change." Malik leaned back, letting the car rock gently over the potholes. The weight of the assault, the fear, the systemic injustice, all still lingered. But he also felt the first real stirrings of resilience. Reese's authority had faltered in front of witnesses, in front of scrutiny, and most importantly, in front of the truth. He didn't know how long the process would take, or if justice would be complete. But he knew that today he had spoken. Today, the red dot of his camera had witnessed the system itself being questioned. And somewhere in the hum of the city, he imagined that the blinking light had a heartbeat, not just of evidence, but of resistance. The morning of the verdict arrived with a quiet tension that seemed to seep into the very walls of the courthouse. Malik and his mother, Denise, sat side by side, their hands intertwined, fingers tight with anticipation and residual fear. The public gallery was packed. Reporters, activists, local citizens, and a few curious onlookers from the neighborhood who had followed Malik's story since the viral footage first surfaced. Cameras hummed quietly, capturing every detail, as if the walls themselves were aware of what was at stake. The judge, a stern woman with an air of careful impartiality, entered the room. Her robes whispered against the polished floor. Silence fell immediately, every footstep, every shuffling of papers amplified by the stillness. Malik's stomach twisted, a mixture of fear, hope, and exhaustion. Months of testimony, footage, social media storms, and interviews had led to this moment. After careful review of the evidence, including eyewitness accounts, recorded footage, and Officer Daniel Reese's disciplinary history, the judge began, voice steady. The board finds that excessive force was used in the arrest and assault of Mr. Malik Johnson. Officer Reese is hereby subject to disciplinary action, including termination and referral for criminal prosecution. The words landed like a sledgehammer. Malik blinked, barely able to process them. Relief and disbelief battled in his chest. Around the courtroom, murmurs spread, some quiet nods, some audible gasps. Denise's grip on his hand tightened, a small, fierce gesture of pride and release. Reese's face remained composed for a moment, but then his jaw twitched, his eyes narrowing, a faint tremor in his hands. Authority had protected him for years, but the veneer was cracking. He had been shielded by protocol, by bureaucracy, by the assumption that complaints could be buried, ignored, or dismissed. Today, the pattern could no longer hide behind excuses. Malik felt a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. This was justice, but it was not a clean victory. The scars on his body and psyche remained, the fear still lingered, and he knew that the world could be cruel and unforgiving, even when one was technically right. Yet the systemic walls had been forced to acknowledge truth. Outside, the media swarmed. Reporters shouted questions. Camera lenses zoomed in on his bruised but steady face. Malik tried to block it out, focusing instead on the red of his camera, safely tucked into his bag. It had witnessed everything, survived the assault, and now symbolized accountability in a way words alone could not. A reporter pressed a microphone forward. "Malik, do you feel justice has been served?" He paused. His eyes scanned the crowd, the cameras, the faces of those who had supported him. "It's a start," he said carefully. "Justice doesn't erase what happened. But today, the system had to recognize what's real, what's visible. That matters." Denise wrapped an arm around him as they walked away from the courthouse. People on the street nodded. Some waved, some clapped quietly. It was small but meaningful. The story had grown beyond a single assault. It had become a testament to persistence, evidence, and the courage of witnesses. Later, at home, Malik reviewed the footage once more. Each frame felt heavier now, filled with context, meaning, and the way of accountability. The red recording to blink steadily, as if affirming that the story he had captured had made a tangible difference. But there were consequences he hadn't anticipated. Malik noticed online chatter questioning him, criticizing his every movement, analyzing his demeanor, questioning his credibility even after the verdict. Fame, even of this kind, carried a shadow. People wanted to twist his story, to reduce his courage to a meme or a talking point. Malik learned quickly that exposure was a double-edged sword. He also learned that public attention could protect him. The viral footage and widespread reporting had forced the city and the department to act. Without visibility, the officers' union and the shield of bureaucracy might have preserved his position indefinitely. Justice was partial, fragile, and mediated by attention. A few days later, Malik received a call from the local district attorney's office. "We're pursuing charges against Officer Reese for assault and abuse of authority," the voice on the line said. "Your testimony and footage are critical. We want to ensure accountability is comprehensive." Malik's chest tightened, but this time in a way that carried determination rather than fear. The system that sought to silence him could no longer function unchallenged. Every frame, every witness, every public reaction had pushed it toward exposure. At school, students whispered, some supportive, some still wary. Teachers approached cautiously, acknowledging his bravery and reminding him to be careful. Malik walked the halls differently now, more aware, more measured, but with a quiet confidence that came from knowing the truth had teeth. Even Officer Reese's supporters had begun to fracture. Union representatives spoke in guarded tones, tried to defend him, but the narrative was no longer theirs to control. Media outlets traced patterns of abuse, complaints, and prior misconduct, leaving the officer increasingly isolated. Authority had limits, and they had been exposed. Malik understood that justice was messy. He would not erase the trauma, the fear, or the humiliation. But accountability had arrived, partial and imperfect, and it bore real consequences for the abuser. Reese was no longer untouchable. The system had acknowledged patterns that could no longer be ignored. That night, Malik walked the city streets alone for a moment, camera in hand. The glow of streetlights reflected off the lens. The red recording, faint but persistent, blinked steadily. He recorded nothing in particular, just the ordinary world. But the act itself felt like reclaiming space, reclaiming agency. He thought of every minor, every citizen, every person who had been dismissed, silenced, or brutalized. Today, there was proof that visibility could create pressure, that courage could force accountability. And for the first time since the assault, Malik felt that his work as a journalist, his choice to document, to record, to resist, had a real impact beyond himself. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt wary, aware, and slightly weary. Justice had a cost, and he had paid part of it with fear, scars, and sleepless nights. But the outcome mattered. It mattered that patterns had been named. It mattered that Reese had faced consequences. It mattered that witnesses, including a 17-year-old journalist, had been taken seriously. Malik raised his camera, blinking red, steady, and spoke quietly to himself. This is why I record. This is why I witness. This is why I speak. The city hummed around him. Ordinary, indifferent, alive, and yet, in the ordinary, he had made the extraordinary visible. For the first time in months, Malik allowed himself a small exhale, letting tension leave his shoulders. The fight wasn't over. There would be appeals, public debates, media spin. But the scales had shifted, even if just slightly. He had witnessed, he had survived, and he had forced accountability. And that, he realized, was a beginning, not just for him, but for everyone who had been silenced by patterns of abuse. The television buzzed softly in Malik's living room, the glow of the screen casting long shadows across the walls. The segment had just aired. His story, footage, testimony, and the subsequent verdict against Officer Reese. CNN had framed it as a youth journalist, exposing systemic patterns, highlighting how evidence and courage forced accountability. Malik sat rigidly on the edge of the couch, Denise beside him, gripping his arm tightly. "It's real now," he said quietly. The words fell foreign, heavy with consequence. Months of fear, anxiety, and bruised ribs had finally been distilled into a story seen by millions. Denise nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, Malik. People are watching, listening, and thinking." The broadcast included interviews with witnesses, clips of his footage, and careful but pointed commentary on Reese's prior complaints. His red-hooded frame appeared on the screen repeatedly, eyes clear, voice unwavering, narrating what had happened. Malik felt a mix of pride and vulnerability. This was him, exposed, but also visible, finally recognized as a human being who had endured injustice and refused to be silenced. The next morning, the city seemed subtly altered. Social media erupted again, now focused on accountability and patterns rather than just the incident. Activist groups, local journalists, even city officials debated policies, oversight, and reform. Malik read thread after thread, some praising his courage, others criticizing him, but all acknowledging that the system had failed before and now had been forced to act. "See that?" Denise said, pointing at her phone. "Your story is sparking change." Malik nodded slowly, though fatigue weighed on him. The red dot of his camera seemed to blink back at him from the corner of the laptop screen, a silent affirmation. It had survived punches, bureaucracy, viral circulation. It had witnessed truth, and truth had consequences. He returned to school the next day cautiously. Students still whispered, some supportive, some curious, some envious. Teachers approached quietly, congratulating him, offering guidance, acknowledging his resilience. Malik walked the halls differently now, not just cautious, but deliberate, aware that he had shifted the narrative, however slightly. Even Officer Reese's public presence began to crumble. Paid leave turned into suspension, and internal investigations intensified. Media outlets traced patterns in his prior behavior, highlighting systemic failures in the department. Union representatives scrambled to protect him, but the coverage made it impossible to ignore repeated abuses. Public visibility had become a form of accountability. Malik began working with the investigative reporter he had met at the community forum. Together, they compiled patterns of misconduct, gathered statements, and presented a clear narrative: a teenage journalist assaulted for doing his job, and a system that had shielded the abuser for years. Each article, each segment, widened the circle of accountability, exposing weaknesses in a bureaucracy that relied on silence. Despite progress, Malik still felt the cost. Nights were restless, replaying the assault, the forearm pressing against his throat, the glare of Reese's badge. The trauma lingered, subtle but persistent. His body remembered in ways the public could never see. Yet he also recognized a newfound resilience. He had endured, testified, and transformed fear into action. One afternoon, a local school invited him to speak to journalism students. The auditorium was packed with teenagers eager to learn from someone their age who had documented truth and faced consequences. Malik spoke carefully, recounting the incident, emphasizing the importance of evidence, courage, and persistence. "Your camera is more than a device," he told them. "It's a witness. It can't erase fear or trauma, but it can expose truth that people in power want to hide. And that matters." Questions followed, some hesitant, some probing. Malik answered with honesty, acknowledging fear, anger, and doubt. He didn't glorify the assault or suggest that courage was easy. It wasn't. But he emphasized the power of bearing witness and speaking truth. Meanwhile, Officer Reese's downfall became increasingly public. Internal reviews found multiple incidents of misconduct over years, and the city faced mounting pressure to reform the police department. Community leaders demanded transparency, training, and accountability measures. Reese, once untouchable, became a symbol of systemic failure, his credibility eroded by visibility and evidence. Malik's footage had become a touchstone. Each frame, each blink of the red recording light, represented resistance to authority that had been abused. It inspired other journalists, minors and adults alike, to document, speak, and demand accountability. Malik recognized a paradox. Trauma had forced him into the spotlight, but in that spotlight, he had created a tool for change. The process was far from over. Lawsuits, disciplinary hearings, and policy revisions loomed. But Malik understood that exposure, truth made public, was the first, most crucial act of justice. Even with the emotional toll, even with scrutiny and criticism, he had leveraged visibility into a tangible, systemic response. One evening, Malik walked through the city streets, camera in hand. The glow of streetlights reflected off the lens. He paused at the corner where the assault had happened. The scene now quiet, ordinary, indifferent, but the camera remained, recording not just the street, but the resilience and vigilance it symbolized. He thought of all those who had suffered similar assaults, whose stories had been hidden, ignored, or dismissed. His footage had forced visibility, and with visibility came pressure, accountability, and sometimes change. He realized that bravery wasn't about the absence of fear. It was about acting despite it. At home, Denise watched him with quiet pride. "You've done more than survive, Malik," she said softly. "You've forced accountability where it was needed, and you've inspired others." Malik nodded. "It's not over, but it's a start." His phone buzzed with notifications, messages from journalists, activists, friends, and strangers. The story had grown wings, and though some of them were critical, most expressed support, encouragement, and determination to see systemic change through. That night, Malik reviewed the footage one final time before closing his laptop. Each frame remained powerful. The shove, the forearm, the glare of authority, the blink of the red dot. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt aware, wary, and determined. Justice had come partially, and accountability had arrived, but the process of change was ongoing. Malik whispered to the blinking, a private conversation between witness and witness. "We saw it, we survived it, and we'll make sure it's remembered." Outside, the city hummed with life, oblivious and ordinary. Inside Malik's room, the camera's red light blinked steadily, a heartbeat of resilience and testimony. It had survived punches, bureaucracy, viral attention, and fear. And in its quiet persistence, Malik saw a symbol of what could endure. Truth, witnessed and unflinching, demanding recognition, demanding accountability. He knew that Officer Reese's power had been broken, that systemic cracks had been exposed, and that his own courage had forced change. But he also knew the cost: fear, trauma, and the weight of visibility. He carried them all, balanced now with the knowledge that bearing witness could alter outcomes, even if slowly, imperfectly, and painfully. Malik turned off the camera, letting the room fall silent. He could hear the distant hum of traffic, the whisper of wind through the city streets, and in that quiet, he felt a strange calm. He had survived. He had spoken. He had forced the system to see the truth. And for now, that was enough. Outside, somewhere in the city, accountability had begun to take root. Inside Malik, resilience had grown, fragile but persistent, and the red, steady and unyielding, blinked one last time as if to confirm. Witness endured. Witness prevailed. Witness remained. The weeks that followed the verdict blurred together in a haze of interviews, public appearances, and quiet reflection. Malik had returned to a semblance of routine: school, homework, and the occasional weekend walk. But nothing felt entirely ordinary anymore. The city itself seemed subtly altered, as if the collective consciousness had shifted slightly, acknowledging a young voice that refused to be silenced. CNN had offered Malik a continuing role as a youth contributor. His footage, his testimony, and his experience had become more than a single story. They were now a lens through which systemic issues could be examined. He recorded segments about police accountability, journalistic ethics, and civic responsibility. Each time he spoke into the camera, he felt the weight of responsibility, but also the quiet pulse of empowerment. Every time we turn the lens on injustice, he told his viewers in one recorded segment, we make the invisible visible. Courage doesn't erase fear, but it can change outcomes. At home, Denise watched him from the doorway, a quiet pride radiating from her. She had seen her son endure the unimaginable and emerge not embittered but deliberate, careful, and steadfast. The bruises on his body had faded, but the memory of them lingered. More importantly, the psychological scars, residual fear, hypervigilance, were ongoing. Yet she also saw him transform fear into purpose, trauma into advocacy. The city had responded. 2. Officer Reese had been terminated from the force. Criminal charges were proceeding, making their way through the judicial system. The police department had implemented new oversight measures, retraining protocols, and stricter complaint review processes. It was not perfect, far from it, but progress was undeniable. Malik had witnessed the slow turn of accountability, and in some measure, he had made it happen. One late afternoon, Malik returned to the street corner where it all began. The asphalt smelled faintly of rain and dust. Cars passed by, indifferent, but the memory of the assault lingered in the texture of the sidewalk, the hum of traffic, the faint echo of that day's sirens. He set his camera on a nearby bench and recorded the scene, not for news, not for viral footage, but for himself, a reminder that even ordinary spaces could hold extraordinary stories. He spoke softly to the lens, words meant for no one but himself. I was afraid here. I was attacked. I was almost invisible. And yet I survived. I witnessed. I made it matter. The red recording blinked steadily, familiar and unwavering, as if affirming that the act of witnessing endured beyond the assault, beyond public scrutiny, beyond time. School continued, with its subtle challenges and triumphs. Some students treated Malik as a local celebrity. Others, still uncomfortable or jealous, maintained their distance. Teachers and administrators were cautious but supportive. Malik had learned to navigate attention with care, balancing visibility with personal safety and mental health. At times, he revisited the online commentary. Supportive messages, activist campaigns, investigative threads about Reese's prior misconduct. But there were also reminders that exposure came at a cost. Some messages attacked him personally, others minimized his experience, and a few suggested that he had somehow provoked the assault. Malik had learned to read these with equanimity, knowing that truth and perception often diverged, and that public attention was both protection and vulnerability. Despite the turbulence, Malik felt a growing sense of agency. He began mentoring younger students interested in journalism. He taught them not just technical skills, but the importance of ethics, courage, and documenting truth. His story became an example, a cautionary tale, and a source of inspiration. One evening, Malik and Denise sat together on the porch. The city skyline glowed softly in the distance, punctuated by streetlights and passing cars. Silence stretched comfortably between them. "You've changed things," Denise said quietly. "Not just for yourself, but for the others who would have been ignored. You've given them a voice." Malik nodded, looking down at his camera. "It's not perfect," he admitted. "I've seen how the system bends, how it protects those in power. But we forced it to bend this time. And that counts." She smiled, a small, tender gesture. "It counts more than you know. You've taken trauma and turned it into testimony, fear into evidence, and visibility into change. That's rare, Malik." The conversation drifted into a comfortable quiet, the kind that comes when exhaustion and resolve coexist. Malik reflected on the months since the assault. The fear, the public exposure, the legal battles, and the viral circulation of his footage. Each moment had carried cost. Each step had demanded courage, and each victory, partial and fragile, had been hard-won. He also understood the long-term impact. Officer Reese would face legal consequences, yes, but systemic change was slower, ongoing, and dependent on continued vigilance. Malik's story had created cracks in the wall, but the walls themselves were strong and persistent. Witnessing alone could not dismantle the entire system, but could chip away one frame, one testimony, one courageous act at a time. That night, Malik returned to his bedroom, setting the camera on the desk. He began reviewing old footage, not just the assault, but clips from interviews, community forums, and advocacy work. The red blinked with quiet insistence, a reminder that stories persisted beyond fear, beyond bruises, and beyond individual pain. He reflected on what he had learned. Courage was messy, resilience was ongoing, and justice was rarely absolute. But visibility had power, and he had wielded it. The system could no longer ignore him, nor could it fully dismiss the truth he had captured. And in that realization, Malik found a fragile but persistent sense of peace. Days turned into weeks, and the city continued its rhythm. Malik's story remained relevant in conversations about police accountability, youth journalism, and civic responsibility. He had become a quiet symbol of resistance, not through confrontation, but through careful, deliberate witness. One afternoon, he met with a group of young journalists for a workshop. The room was filled with energy, curiosity, and fearlessness. Malik shared not only technical skills, but also the lessons of courage, the nuances of systemic injustice, and the importance of visibility. His own experience served as both caution and inspiration. "You have a voice," he told them, "and it matters. The world may try to silence you, misinterpret you, or dismiss you, but documenting truth, bearing witness, and speaking honestly can make a difference. It won't always be easy, and it won't always feel like victory, but it counts." By the time he returned home, the city lights shimmered against the horizon. Malik set the camera down, watching the blinking red, a fade, as he powered it off. He understood that this story, this moment, and this work would continue to ripple outward, far beyond his own life. He exhaled, letting the weight of months lift slightly from his shoulders. Justice had arrived in part, accountability had begun, and resilience had taken root. Malik knew the system would always need vigilance, but he had proved that courage, combined with truth and persistence, could leave a mark, however imperfect, however incomplete. And in the quiet, Malik finally allowed himself a moment of stillness. He had endured, witnessed, and survived. The red dot of his camera, once a passive witness to fear, had become a symbol of resistance, testimony, and change. For Malik Johnson, the story was far from over, but the battle for visibility, truth, and justice had been won, at least in this chapter of his life. He sat back, letting the city hum around him, feeling the weight of the past and the fragile hope of the future. The world had seen, and in being seen, he had survived, and forced a reckoning that no single badge could erase.